What if the most beautiful thing about you became the reason your life was destroyed? In the vast, blood-stained corridors of Roman history lined with tyrants, betrayals, and executions, there lies a story so disturbing, so intimate, that it has rarely been told without trembling. It is the story of Sporus, not a general, not a senator, not even a criminal, just a boy. A boy whose only crime was being beautiful in the presence of a man who wielded absolute power. This is not merely a tale of ancient politics or imperial madness. It is a haunting reflection of what happens when grief turns into obsession and love curdles into control. When identity is not taken in battle but stolen in silk and ceremony. Sporus was not erased in public by sword or fire, but in private, behind marble walls and golden curtains, in the quiet horror of surgical violence and whispered obedience. He was turned into someone else, paraded as a wife, mourned like a ghost, and ultimately broken not by death, but by survival. His story forces us to confront a chilling truth that in the wrong hands, beauty is not a blessing, it's a sentence. And when power meets grief without restraint, the human soul becomes a canvas for cruelty. This is not just history. This is a warning. In the heart of the Roman Empire, where marble palaces shimmered beneath the Mediterranean sun and emperors were worshipped as gods, a boy named Sporus was born into silence. History does not remember his childhood, his dreams, or even the sound of his voice. It remembers only his face, delicate, almost ethereal. A beauty that didn't protect him, it condemned him. Sporus was not born into power, but into proximity to it. As a young freedman, he existed on the fragile edge of Roman society, technically free but entirely vulnerable. In a world where the emperor's desire was law, survival often meant disappearing. But Sporus stood out even when he tried not to. His soft features, his graceful movements, everything about him caught the wrong kind of attention. In another life, he might have lived quietly. But in Nero's Rome, where grief wore a crown and madness ruled behind golden walls, beauty was the beginning of the end. By the year 65 AD, the Roman Empire had stretched its grip across continents, commanding the wild shores of Britain and the burning sands of the East. From the Senate's marble steps to the blood-stained stones of the Colosseum, Rome projected an illusion of order and grandeur. At its center stood Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, young, theatrical, and dangerously untouchable. To the world, he was emperor. To Rome, increasingly, he was a storm in silk robes. His passions blurred the lines between art and cruelty, indulgence and madness. Nero performed on stage, sang like a god, and built palaces larger than cities. But behind the shimmering gold of the Domus Aurea, his infamous golden house, a darker transformation was taking place. Nero was unraveling. And when a man with unchecked power begins to lose himself, it's not the mighty who fall first. It's the vulnerable. And Sporus, young and fragile, had just entered the emperor's gaze. Inside Nero's vast household, where servants bowed without eye contact and silence was a survival skill, Sporus moved like a shadow. Though legally free, he had no true autonomy. He lived at the mercy of whims, and no whim in Rome was more dangerous than the emperor's. Descriptions of Sporus from ancient historians speak of otherworldly beauty, soft angelic features that seemed untouched by the brutalism of Roman life. But in an empire where beauty was not admired, it was possessed, such grace became a threat. Sporus did not ask to stand out, yet every glance in his direction became heavier, more invasive. His presence stirred something in Nero, not desire at first, but recognition. A face he had seen before, a face that grief had burned into memory. Sporus didn't know it yet, but he was no longer just a boy in the palace. He had become a mirror for a dead woman, and the emperor was about to claim him. Pompeia Sabina, Nero's second wife, had died under brutal and suspicious circumstances. Some whispered that Nero had struck her in a violent rage while she was pregnant, crushing both mother and unborn child in a single blow. Others claimed she died from complications after childbirth. Whatever the truth, her death shattered something inside the emperor. Not with guilt, but with longing. Nero didn't mourn like a man, he mourned like a god denied his favorite creation. And when he saw Sporus with those haunting, delicate features so eerily similar to Pompeia's, his grief twisted into something monstrous. It was not love. It was not lust. It was resurrection at any cost. In Sporus, Nero saw a way to bring Pompeia back, but not through memory or art or mourning, through flesh, through violence, through transformation. In that moment, Sporus stopped being a person. He became a project, a replacement, a vessel for a dead empress. And the emperor's obsession had only just begun. The command was given in silence, but its weight shattered Sporus's world. Nero ordered the boy to be castrated to erase what made him male, to mold him into a shadow of the woman he had lost. It wasn't just mutilation. It was a ritual of control, a theft of future dignity and self. Behind closed palace doors, imperial physicians performed the unspeakable. No ceremony, no consent. Only cold instruments and colder indifference. Whatever screams escaped were swallowed by marble halls and gilded ceilings. And then came the wedding. Draped in Pompeia's silks adorned with her jewels, Sporus was renamed Sabina and presented as Nero's bride. Senators, foreign envoys, even Roman nobility stood in forced silence as the emperor paraded his living ghost down the aisle. The ceremony was lavish, grotesque, and eerily quiet. Not one dared to stop it. Sporus, mutilated and dressed in memory, had become both wife and symbol of love, corrupted of identity, consumed. From that day forward, Sporus was no longer allowed to exist as himself. He became Pompeia's shadow, paraded beside Nero in every public appearance, at feasts, in the theater, even in imperial ceremonies. Draped in embroidered gowns, he was expected to smile, speak softly, and carry himself with the poise of a Roman empress. But beneath the silk and gold lay raw wounds, both seen and unseen. Rome, used to the eccentricities of emperors, now stared in stunned silence. They saw through the illusion. This was no empress reborn. This was a boy surgically altered, trapped in a costume stitched from grief and madness. Every gesture had to be perfect. Every misstep, every flicker of resistance risked awakening Nero's violent fury. And yet, there were moments of tenderness, gifts, praise, even affection. But these were not signs of love. They were tools in a brutal cycle, reward and punishment, submission and survival. Sporus was living in a gilded prison with no key. Behind the spectacle, behind the diamonds and titles, Sporus lived in a prison more cruel than chains, one made of performance. He wasn't simply pretending to be someone else. He was being erased piece by piece and rebuilt in Nero's image of a woman who no longer lived. His voice was softened, his posture corrected. Every day became a rehearsal for a role he never auditioned for. He was expected to speak as Pompeia would walk as she had, breathe as she might have. Any flicker of his true self, any slip of masculinity or defiance was punished with icy rage or humiliating silence. And so he disappeared, not physically but spiritually. The boy named Sporus. The person was dissolving beneath layers of silk makeup and expectation. What remained was not a lover, not a wife, but a reflection, a creation, a ghost sculpted to soothe the grief of a man who ruled as a god and destroyed as a child. As Nero's madness deepened, the empire around him began to fracture. The Senate grew restless, the military whispered betrayal, and even the emperor's closest guards started to pull away. By 68 AD, rebellion erupted across provinces. Rome no longer worshipped Nero, they feared him, and then they despised him. Fearing capture, Nero fled the city with only a handful of loyal followers. Among them was Sporus, still dressed as an empress, still trapped in the identity forced upon him. He didn't choose this escape. He didn't choose to run with the man who stole everything from him. But choice had never been his to begin with. As they hid from loyalists turned enemies, Nero spiraled into delusion, mumbling of glory and vengeance. And then, when all hope was lost, the emperor took his own life, choosing suicide over public shame. Yet for Sporus, Nero's death was not freedom. It was the beginning of a new chapter in captivity, a life still owned just under a different name. After Nero's death, Sporus was not released. He was transferred like an heirloom soaked in shame. First into the hands of Emperor Galba, who kept him in gilded confinement not as a person, but as a living curiosity. Then came Otho, who had once been married to Pompeia herself. Some say he treated Sporus with a strange gentleness, as if honoring the memory of the woman they both had been tied to. But even this brief calm was swept away by power's relentless tide. When Vitellius seized the throne, Sporus's nightmare plunged into its final, most degrading phase. The new emperor devised a public spectacle so vile that even decadent Rome recoiled. He planned to stage a grotesque parody, forcing Sporus to reenact the mythological rape of Persephone in the arena, transforming his stolen life into theater once again. For years, Sporus had been dressed, reshaped, and paraded. Now he was to be desecrated under roaring cheers and imperial banners. Faced with the final insult, the threat of being publicly violated before thousands, Sporus made the only choice that was ever truly his. He took his own life, not in spectacle, not in defiance of gods or emperors, but in quiet, desperate reclamation of dignity. In that final act, Sporus did what no ruler had allowed him. He ended the performance. He chose not to become a prop in one more imperial fantasy. History barely noticed. The empire moved on as it always did, writing over the broken, forgetting the erased. But in truth, Sporus's story endures as one of the most haunting reflections of unchecked power. He was not a villain, not a soldier, not a legend. He was a boy whose body was stolen, whose name was rewritten, and whose silence was mistaken for consent. And yet even through torment, one thing remained: the unkillable ember of the human spirit, the final fragile word, no. Sporus's story is not just a footnote in the life of a mad emperor. It is a mirror held up to humanity's darkest impulses. In him, we see what happens when grief is given absolute power, when identity becomes property, and when beauty is no longer admired but consumed. He was transformed into a symbol, a doll, a ghost of someone else, all to soothe the wounds of a man who couldn't accept death or limits. But in choosing death on his own terms, Sporus gave history its final image not of a victim, but of someone who refused to be broken any further. His silence echoes louder than Nero's madness. His suffering speaks to every soul that has ever been used, reshaped, or erased. And in remembering Sporus not as a bride, not as a spectacle, but as a human being, we honor something deeper than history. We honor the quiet, often unseen fight for the right to exist as oneself.